Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Prime Minister is in Cardiff today to meet the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales, and the first and only item on the agenda is Brexit. Theresa May says she wants to continue constructive discussions with the leaders of the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland about Britain's future relationship with the EU. However, she's made it clear she is in the driving seat, and the Scottish and Welsh governments say they have not seen any sign that Mrs May is taking their proposals seriously. Our chief political correspondent Vicky Young is in Cardiff. Vicky, what have you found out from the meeting so far?
Well, it's interesting because Theresa May said to Nicola Sturgeon when she became Prime Minister that she wanted the devolved nations to be fully involved in discussions in the run-up to Brexit. Now, the clock is ticking now with Article 50 due to be probably triggered by the end of March, and Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, they all want to have their say. But really now it's all about what type of Brexit Theresa May wants. I think her making that speech where she said she thought the UK would leave the single market, that has really riled particularly the SNP. It's not what they want. They say it's not what their people want, and they don't think that the UK government is in any way listening. They think that they're coming to these meetings, but actually it's not having any impact. Today, or just before this meeting, Nicola Sturgeon said that time was running out for the Prime Minister to heed the voice of Scotland. So today there's a paper on the table about how Scotland feels it could stay in the single market even if the UK were to leave. Now, how that might work, no one is particularly sure, but I think there are people in the Commons as well. We've heard from Labour MPs and the SNP there. They feel the same. They feel that Theresa May is dictating what they would call a hard Tory Brexit, and they don't feel that they're having any input.
Vicky Young, thank you. Now, let's stick with Brexit, as MPs will tomorrow start debating the bill which will trigger Britain's departure from the EU. Most commentators are predicting that it will pass its early Commons stages without too much problem. But there is still plenty of other potential obstacles to come before we reach the Brexit finishing line. Mark Lebel has been to the Lee Valley Athletics Centre to find out more.
In the run-up to triggering Article 50 and keeping our EU negotiations on track, what hurdles lie ahead for the government?
The EU divorce bill will be debated in the Commons this week with several parliamentary hurdles to overcome. The first, second reading, will be a vote on the main principles of the bill, which will most likely be followed by a vote on the government's preferred timetable of triggering Article 50 by the end of March, which could also limit the time available for the next hurdle, amendments put forward by MPs deemed appropriate by the Deputy Speaker.
The really interesting thing about these votes is that the vast majority of MPs are going to end up voting for something with which they passionately disagree and with which they feel will have disastrous consequences for the country. And that's why tensions are so high within the parties and why you have this really quite remarkable situation of Labour whips potentially not voting for their own position. But I think when people talk about this in terms of whether the Parliament is going to block it or not, they're missing the point. It's going to go through. What matters, however, is how long it takes to go through and whether it's amended on its way through. And it's the amendments that I think are crucial here.
The Liberal Democrats said they'll only vote for the bill if a referendum on the deal is promised.
I think one of the amendments that probably won't have much chance of passing, because I don't think there's much appetite within Parliament for it, is the idea of a second referendum. I think it's some of the other amendments on things like reporting to Parliament or the role of EU nationals already living in this country. Those strike me as potentially more difficult for the government.
The Lords then have their say. There's no control over their timetable and no amendment can be ruled out of order, so anything could happen. But large delays would be a risky move from an unelected chamber. Once Article 50 is triggered and those parliamentary hurdles cleared, the EU negotiations begin. Leading them on behalf of EU heads of state and government will be the former French minister Michel Barnier, who wants a draft agreement as early as October 2018. It will then be put to a vote of the European Parliament, where just over half its members will need to support it for it to proceed. The agreement also needs to clear the European Council, with support from 72% of the 27 member states, representing at least 65% of the total population of those countries. Once that's all done, it's back to Westminster. Theresa May has said there will be a final vote in Parliament, with a no vote meaning no deal. Another hurdle could spring up along the way. If MPs thought the deal was running into trouble, they could call a no confidence vote in the government. So that's it. 10 hurdles over 110 metres, except some politicians argue there could be one more. Revoking Article 50, thus reversing the decision to leave.
That's right. Pretend we never shot the firing gun in the first place. Thank you.
It's not clear that that is something Westminster can do on its own, and it would require the agreement of the other EU nation states. But there's no doubt that some MPs would like to see that happen.
To leave the EU, the UK has to clear at least 10 hurdles.
Brilliant. Well done, Jules.
Now begins that journey, which is set to dominate British politics for years.
So it is a marathon, not a sprint, to carry on that analogy. Mims Davies, Nicola Sturgeon thinks Theresa May isn't really listening to her, and has said so, isn't taking seriously what the Scottish and Welsh governments are proposing on Brexit. And she's right.
I think this is a typical Nicola Sturgeon line of, I'm not getting what I want on this. We have had a decision by the majority of the British people to leave the European Union. I think for UK PLC, for jobs, for security, for what we need to be doing as a government, we need to get on with this, and I'm really pleased with the timetable.
No, I understand that, but Theresa May's not listening. I mean, that is true, isn't it? She's not listening to them.
The Prime Minister is there today listening, but I've got the feeling with Ms Sturgeon that unless it's the argument she wants to hear, then I think there's probably not listening going potentially on both sides.
But what's the point of Theresa May saying that she's going to have these meetings because she's going to take into account the feelings and wishes of the devolved administrations when she has absolutely no intention of doing so?
Well, I'm sure that it's not going to be a waste of time. I'm sure there's something that can be taken away from this. I think sort of peeling back the layers and the onions and as Scotland and hoping that they're going to get exactly what they want is difficult. If you look at Wales, it's a different issue. They voted to go, and I think you're going to see.
But the Labour administration there still wants to stay in the single market.
But I think they're going to. I think people are going to end up being realistic about actually, do we want to be navel gazing on this, or do we want to get on with things? Because there are companies, global companies, British companies, who are making decisions based on what they need to keep people in jobs, which pays mortgages and keeps people in homes.
Sure.
I think politicians need to get on with it and work together.
You say you think there will be something that will be given to the devolved administrations, that these meetings aren't a waste of time. But can you give me any example, however small, of where Theresa May has actually moved in the direction of what the Scottish and Welsh governments would like?
Can I give you another example? I think if the Prime Minister thinks, or if we think it's not right to concede because actually it's going to mess up the rest of the deal, then I don't think we should be doing that either.
Right.
I think anyone should be holding to ransom
so she's not going to she's not going to concede on anything.
I'm saying listen and find out what's really practicable. But if ultimately it's about a stop to Nicola Sturgeon, I don't think anybody in the UK wants that.
What about the idea of staying in the single market? I mean, to be fair, that's not Labour's policy either, is it? So if you were in charge, Nicola Sturgeon wouldn't be getting away on staying in the single market either.
Well, the Prime Minister's made it clear that that isn't going to happen.
And it's not Labour policy either.
No, I mean, what Labour policy is to secure the best possible deal. This has been quite a challenging time for us as a party. Clearly, many of us campaigned to remain within the European Union.
Yes.
But we've decided, rightly in my view, that given that this is such a big strategic political challenge for the country, it's right that we coalesce around a formed view, and that's what we've done.
But is it right for Labour and Jeremy Corbyn to actually try and party manage Labour MPs who, as you say, represented vast majorities of Remain voters? They themselves voted Remain. Wouldn't it have been better to have had a free vote on the Labour side?
I don't think it would have been better to have had a free vote. This is such an important issue for the future of our country, and for the Labour Party to have said that we were not able to reach a formed view, that we couldn't bring people together.
But you can't. I mean, it's very clear that you can't. There are about 100 Labour MPs, and some of them are in the shadow cabinet, and some of them are supposed to be party whips, who are the ones that impose party discipline. I mean, it really isn't a consensus at all.
Well, we'll see whether it's a consensus or not in terms of the number of people who vote with us or don't.
You think
with us.
it'll be less, do you?
Well, I think there are a number of good colleagues who have difficult judgments to make, particularly those who represent constituencies that voted to remain. But from the point of view of our party, given that this is such a big issue for the country, I don't think it would have been the right thing to have had a free vote. I think it is the right thing for Jeremy to say that this is our view and that he expects his members of parliament, particularly those on the front bench, to support that view. I think that's the right thing to do.
But if you are trying to enforce, as you say, a party line, to have a formed view, was it the right strategy for the Deputy Leader Tom Watson to say that shadow cabinet members who resign can get their jobs back in a couple of months?
Well, just because you stand down from the front bench over a particular issue, even if it's a very important one like Brexit, that doesn't mean that you couldn't go back and serve at some point.
Well,
in the
except
future.
it's not going to stop people doing it. I mean, if you're trying to persuade people to come on board to present a united front within Labour rather than a very divided one, surely the sanctions have to be at least relatively strong.
Well, I'm not sure that that would be particularly helpful in the current climate, where people have to make very difficult judgments about whether to represent the views of their constituents or what they themselves believe to be the right thing to do. All of us in politics wrestle with those kind of decisions. But Brexit is the defining issue of our generation.
If you're in
We've
the
got to get
Labour
it right.
marginal and you've got a strong UKIP vote and you had a strong Remain vote, you're in a difficult position. I think this isn't easy for anyone. The most disingenuous position, I think what the Labour Party is trying to do on this is really applaudable, because it's difficult for them, I think, is the Liberal Democrat position, hardly turning up at the debates, you know, chuntering from the sidelines about wanting to rerun things. I think accepting that a decision has been made, turning up and contributing and making the best of it is absolutely the best.
But it is
way
a very
forward.
clear message, I suppose you could say, and it's a unified
There are
message
many
in terms of what they're saying.
Yeah, many colleagues in all parties who will find this difficult. I find it very easy, but I'm not, you know, for other colleagues, this is a difficult balance. There are by-elections as a result of this.
Well, except, of course, is this going to be the case in every decision that the Labour Party has to make? You say this is the defining issue. There are many important issues coming down the line. Will this be how the Labour Party is going to act, with 100 or so MPs defying the Labour whip?
Well, that will be for the leader to decide. But I think the leader is right in this case, on this issue, that we reach a formed view and that colleagues are strongly encouraged to support it. I think that's the right way to proceed. I think it's the right decision, and I think that's... Let's see what the next few days brings. It is difficult for some colleagues, but we have to come together behind a formed view about how to proceed.
One of the amendments that Labour is going to put forward is to do with guaranteeing the rights of EU nationals who are already living here. And as you know, there has been an ongoing row about whether they are being used as bargaining chips. Do you think you could support that amendment?
I think for me it's one of the issues as a constituency MP that I see problems with this. I have people that, you know, live and work abroad. For example, in my area, have a lot in the marine industry who do work.
So would you back a Labour amendment to guarantee the rights of EU
I don't
nationals?
think we need an amendment. I think it needs to be part of the negotiating process, and
Right.
the Prime
Well, that
Minister has
is
been
different
very
then.
clear about this. We're not going to forget about this. This is a very important issue, but at the moment it's one of a number of matters.
Do you think
focus
Mims
on
is wrong on that? That it should still be part of the negotiation, she says, rather than their rights being guaranteed ahead of negotiations?
But I think there's no reason why it couldn't be both of those things, part of the negotiation and an amendment, in order that we get the opportunity to discuss it in Parliament. I think that the purpose for putting it forward is to provide the opportunities for MPs to express their concerns about it, and I think there's merit in doing that.
Right. Are there any other amendments that are of any substance, really?
Well, we'll see, but I think it's very important that the amendments are seen in a constructive way. I think there is a certain view amongst some colleagues on the other side of the House that some of these amendments are in some way a process to slow down the triggering of Article 50. I don't see it in that way. I think it's about adding value to the process.
All right.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has given her clearest warning yet that she may have to consider a second independence referendum. It followed a meeting with Theresa May along with political leaders from Wales and Northern Ireland in Cardiff to discuss the country's negotiating position. Our Scotland editor Sarah Smith reports now from the talks in Cardiff.
Cardiff, the latest stop for the well-travelled Prime Minister, and yet another tricky meeting. This time with the leaders of the governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. They've all complained that the UK government's not living up to promises to keep the devolved nations fully involved in Brexit preparations. After the meeting, Nicola Sturgeon warned time is running out to reach agreement.
Very clear today that this period now in the run-up to the triggering of Article 50 is crucial to determine whether or not there is any hope of getting a UK-wide position, and I've been very clear to the Prime Minister. I wasn't the only voice around the table in terms of the devolved administrations who made the point about the importance of the period in advance of triggering Article 50.
You seem to be suggesting that in April, once Article 50 has been triggered and we know what the UK government's approach is, that's when you'll make up your mind about whether or not you're going to have another referendum on Scottish independence.
I think I've been very clear about the critical importance of the period between now and the triggering of Article 50, but I'm also clear that we've just agreed to try and intensify that work, so I'm not going to close the door on that. But of course it stands to reason that if the people of Scotland are to be given a choice, then the time for that is finite. This process can't go on forever.
The Scottish and Welsh governments have both produced similar proposals that would allow them to maintain free trade with the EU single market, allow for free movement of people controlled by work visas, and membership of the European Economic Area.
We've put forward a suggestion they haven't done yet. What we want is for our suggestion to be taken on board by them.
But UK government ministers appear to reject any part of Britain remaining inside the single market.
You can't be a member of the single market if you're not a member of the EU, and the United Kingdom is leaving the EU. I think that if we can get that best possible access, that actually will be what is in Scotland's best interest.
Theresa May left Cardiff on her way to Dublin for more Brexit discussions.
No matter how tense and difficult this meeting may have been, Theresa May knows it is only a taste of what's to come when she has to start negotiations with 27 EU member nations.
Keeping the United Kingdom united at the same time may prove equally challenging. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Cardiff.
Well, as we heard, Theresa May moved on to Dublin, and our Ireland correspondent Chris Buckler is there for us this evening. I gather Theresa May has been speaking. Chris, what's she been saying?
Yeah, I suspect some of the concerns that were raised in Cardiff have been echoed here in Dublin, and both the Irish and British Prime Ministers have been talking about the need to maintain close links, the need for free flow of trade, also talking about the need for a common travel area to allow people to move between them and as seamless a border as possible. Brexit is a concern for the Irish government. They've called it a great challenge and something they are concerned about, and that reflects the trading relationship that exists between the UK and Ireland. But that issue of the border is also something that needs to be addressed, because no one's quite sure what it will look like once the UK leaves the EU. Will there be some kind of customs presence or other presence on that border? Also on the agenda, they've been talking about what's happening north of that border in Northern Ireland, the political instability there. It's worth mentioning that that ministerial summit held in Cardiff was supposed to have been held in Belfast, but it was changed because of the collapse of the power-sharing government at Stormont. And one other figure is casting a shadow over these talks in Dublin, and that is the President Donald Trump, because Theresa May, as you know, is facing questions about the potential state visit in the UK. Well, here also the Irish Prime Minister Enda Kenny. He's facing questions about whether he should go to the White House on St Patrick's Day, as is customary. Lots of political relationships being discussed here today.
Chris, thank you very much.
I've been